ChAIR celebrates its 10th birthday this year, and among its founders were brothers Jeremy and Donald Mustard. When ChAIR was 2 years old, they released their first game called Undertow on Xbox Live Arcade, which met with tremendous critical acclaim, including numerous E3 and Editor's Choice Awards, and was named the Xbox Live Arcade Game of the Year by official Xbox magazine. 7 years ago, ChAIR became a subsidiary of technology provider Epic Games, creators of the Unreal Engine. 6 years ago, ChAIR released their second game, Shadow Complex, which won more than 45 Game of the Year awards and 35 E3 and Editor's Choice Awards. 5 years ago, ChAIR released the first game to use the iOS version of Unreal, called Shadow Complex, which became the fastest grossing app in the history of iOS on its release. So that was Infinity Blades, sorry, not Shadow Complex. 2 more Infinity Blades followed, and just last month, ChAIR announced another remarkable tie-up, a collaboration with Star Wars Force Awakens producer J.J. Abrams, which is Spyjinx. And despite these remarkable video game credentials, you'll find Donald Mustard listed on IMDb as a writer, director, and cinematographer. It also tells us that he's 5'11 and a half, and his star sign is Leo. Tonight, we want to find out if any of those things are true. So please welcome Donald Mustard. Donald. So I'm about 6'11 myself, so...
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that. Hey, everyone. So, give me a quick, layout of the room. Who are you? What audience, who are we talking to tonight? How many of you are game developers? Okay. How many of you are filmmakers? Okay. How many of you are more like either biz dev or in the business of talking about or reporting about digital entertainment or games? Just give me an idea. Okay. And then if I missed you, shout out what or you're just interested in what we're doing. Student. Oh yeah, I guess I should say, how many students? Okay.
I came for the food.
You and me both. Okay. Well, good. Well, so from my perspective, I'm here to talk about whatever you guys want to hear me talk about. I will talk about some things, but I think in a room like this, there's few of us, but also enough of us that we can kind of just talk about whatever you want.
Ending of Star Wars.
You don't want me to talk about the ending of Star Wars? Not yet. I can tell you some Star Wars stuff, though, if you want to hear some Star Wars stuff. Okay, so I'll talk about some stuff, but feel free to... We don't have to wait till the end either for questions and stuff. If you want to just raise your hand or interrupt me even, that's fine. And we'll get started. That's fine. Let's start.
Was ChAIR start as an independent company? And if so, how did you get yourselves out there, and what was that process like?
That's a great question. All right, so I'll start with a story, and we'll come back to that. I promise this comes to that. So 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago this week, my wife Laura and I and my brother Jeremy were sitting down in this office. And it was really weird because we were about to be meeting with J.J. Abrams. We were sitting in his office on his couch, and we didn't really know why we were there. We had been introduced by mutual partner through Apple, right? Because we'd worked with Apple and they'd worked with Apple, and through this other story that I won't tell you now, we landed in the same room. And I remember sitting there thinking, I cannot believe I'm about to talk to J.J. Abrams, who is one of my favorite creators that's living and working. I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe the circumstances that had led from the beginning of your question to that moment in just a few years. And that was a pretty amazing and kind of crazy experience for me because of the way ChAIR started. So I guess I should have asked one other question. How many of you in this room work for ChAIR? Okay. these two, these guys. So ChAIR actually, well, I don't know, Bert, you tell me what you think. I think ChAIR started when we were all students back at BYU. So when I graduated high school in 1994. And at the time, there were no game programs at schools. There were no even animation programs. BYU didn't have, the amazing animation program that it has now. University of Utah didn't have the organization that it has now. I mean, there really wasn't much stuff. And I knew I wanted to go into something in this field. I knew I either wanted to make video games or make films or something like that. And I thought I had to go to an art school. And so I was looking all around the country. I was looking at, Pratt, and I was looking at Art Center, and I was looking at USC. I was looking at all sorts of different schools. And I found out that BYU had been given a donation of 2 computers from Steven Spielberg that were these Silicon Graphics workstations that could run this program called Alias. And that they had them locked away in some room in the design department. And so I'm like, that's it, I have to go to BYU. I have to get access to these computers. And so I went to Brigham Young University, and I started camping out in front of this professor's office who had access to these 2 computers. And that professor was named Brent Adams. How many of you guys know Brent? Okay, so Brent's an awesome guy. And I camped out in front of his room until I could finally meet him. And when I did, I'm like, I need access to this computer. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And he's like, well, that's only for grad students. And you're a freshman, And I'm like, well, just you got to trust me. I really need to do this. I promise I'm going to be, really important in your life and making really cool stuff for BYU. And he didn't believe me, and I just kept pestering him day after day until finally he's like, all right, I will give you a key to my office, and when I'm not in it, you can come use the computer I have on my desk because I have one of those 2 machines in my office. And so I started going in there. I started going in there every night. Like, he would go home about 8 o'clock at night, and I would be there at 8:01, sitting at his desk and working all night, trying to figure out how to render stuff and make stuff work. And through that process, I met other like-minded students, Bert being one of them. Sitting right here, and a few others that aren't here tonight. And we began working together on projects. We began finding similar interests and similar things that inspired us. And at the time, it wasn't working on games because we didn't have access to the stuff you guys have access to. Oh my goodness, if we were you, however many years ago that was, man. Yeah, it's true, we'd be playing games. That's true. Actually, that's the real truth. We would have done nothing because we would have been like, this is awesome. No, we didn't have access to the engines and the technology and the software that you guys have. I mean, I hope. Yeah, you can get the same stuff we make our games on for free, right? And I hope we wouldn't have been, even though that's probably what we really would have done. I hope we wouldn't have. I hope we would have right then started making games together. But we didn't. We started making films together. We started making short films and figuring out animation and figuring out how to work together as a team. And I think more than anything, that's what inspired us to eventually say, let's make a company. Let's try and do something crazy, and let's try and do something on our own. And that's what attracted us to Utah. So I kind of fell in love with Utah while I was at BYU. And I loved the spirit of the innovative, pioneering spirit of BYU really inspired me. And we kind of had this idea that to be successful, we'd probably have to go to California. We'd have to probably start a studio in San Francisco or in LA. And the more we thought about it, the more we talked about it, we said, well, what are we really trying to build? We're trying to build. This is just, again, a group of friends. When ChAIR started, there was 5 or 6 of us. 6? 6 of us. And we started working together in my brother's condo. Right? We just sit there in the living room of his condo, and we would bring our few laptops, and we had a stack of index cards that we would just start storyboarding on and making stuff and pinning it up on the wall and trying to figure out how we were going to go from nothing to something. And really early on, we said, why? Why are we going to do this? And the reason why we wanted to do it is because we wanted to work together. It wasn't even actually about making games. It was this very genuine, sincere desire to do something together. And we even joked about it at the time, saying, if we can't make this video game thing work, we'll all go form a boy band or something. Even though we're all the worst singers and dance. I mean, look at me, right? That wouldn't work, right? But it became from this desire to do something together, and I think that is the secret to ChAIR's success. Is that we would be doing something successful, and it just happens to be games. So that's a very long answer to your question. But it's perfect, because that's kind of what we wanted to talk about tonight anyway. So that led us to say, well, Utah? Because we could have gone anywhere, right? We were all young, we were all poor. It really didn't make a difference. But in sitting down and looking at the resources of Utah, we said, this is a great place. Because in forming a company and having our number one goal be, let's do something together, we quickly came to a conclusion that the number two goal wasn't, again, what we thought would be the obvious answer. Let's make something really awesome. Let's make a cool game that changes the world. It was, let's build something that provides for our families. And I know this is a weird answer, but that was what was really important to us. We're like, no, let's build something that could actually last. Let's try and do this audacious thing where we have no turnover. That if you work at ChAIR, you work at ChAIR forever. Let's try and think of ourselves like a band and not as a company. We are the Beatles, right? And even early on, we're we have to set up practices and paradigms where we never get yokoed. That was actually a term at ChAIR. Don't get yokoed, right? And the more and more we got successful, that became our biggest fear, right? Was, how do we not get yokoed? And maybe we don't say that enough anymore.
Yoko's a metaphor, not a person.
Yeah, yes. No one's looking at you, Laura. Yeah, no. What does that mean? What does that, okay, I guess we're talking to the wrong, so the Beatles broke up because of Yoko Ono. So we say yokoed, right? So anyway, so it was how do you, to us the metaphor meant, and I'll explain it further, to us the metaphor meant that the more you get successful, right, the more ego kind of can come into things, the more that you can start to think you actually matter, and that you have some level of talent or amazingness that makes you better than the other people on the team. And in music, when you look at bands, right, to make music is such a collaborative experience in these bands, and it takes everybody putting everything into it to make something beautiful. And that's been our experience with games and with film, is the only way, every game I play and see that isn't just a horrible pile of nothing is a miracle, right? And this could be a whole different thing we could talk about forever, is to me, what makes a game is it's thousands and thousands of decisions. Thousands and thousands of unique decisions. And the more choices and decisions you make correctly, the better your game is. And you will make some that are wrong. And depending on the kind of game you want to make, you pretty much can't make a game by yourself. And so it's lots of people making thousands and thousands of decisions. And you're trusting that every person on the team is making significantly more good decisions than bad decisions. And the hope is that in the end, that all adds up to something that feels cohesive and unique and polished and delightful. And And that's a very hard thing to do. And so that's what Yoko meant to us, was don't let ego creep in, right? We have to remember that we are all part of a team and that we're only as good as our last decision. And we'll make better decisions if we're not clouded by ego and weird, dumb stuff. And so that was our, our number 2 goal, build something that could provide. And not just provide financially, but could provide an environment where we could actually be creative. Now this is where I only know, like I can only obviously perceive reality and life through the lens of myself, right? Like I only have ever seen something through these eyes. I've only ever thought things through my brain. But I suspect that many of you are kind of like me in my brain, where I have this need to create. Like I have to create. Like I don't know that I really had a choice to go into this field. Like I had to do something like this. And I just feel, I feel so blessed and so crazy fortunate that I got to be born into a time period in this world where I can actually do this as like a job, right? Because even if I couldn't, like if I had to go have a real job and build houses or be an accountant or any of the other wonderful things out there, I would have to come home at night and I would have to do this because this is what I need to do, right? And that would come at the cost, I think, of me not being able to have like a family or kids or anything, because I'd just be like, I have to get this stuff that's inside of me, outside of me. And so I think as a team, we knew that. We knew how fortunate we were to try and embark on something crazy like this. And we said, if we can pull it off, if we can really pull it off, and we can and this isn't true when I say from 9 to 5, because it's more than that, right? But if we can from 9 to 5 get out all that stuff, then we can actually have families, and we can have kids, and we can have lives, and we can actually be like, not just have our dream, but be productive members of society, right? And so we're like, how do we build that? And we didn't think we could build that in Los Angeles. I'm sure there's people who have. In fact, I know people who have. I know JJ has. Like, Bad Robot is actually very similar to ChAIR in its philosophy and structure, but it's really hard because we wanted to be able to have people here have a house and have a driveway and have, the ability to take their kids to parks and not have to drive 3 hours through traffic to get there to do that. And so we just thought that Utah was this perfect vector of opportunity in technology and talent because of the proximity of these awesome schools and this awesome stuff, but also has an economy where we could thrive. And man, that was like the best decision we ever made.
Question for you, Donald. So you've been very successful with your own projects. So what is collaborating with somebody else like you?
That's a great question. So the question is, what has collaborating with people outside of ChAIR brought to us? So I think that's part of our DNA as well. We believe to our core in collaboration. We try to be very collaborative in our studio, right? Everyone that works at ChAIR is seen, and we all just see each other as parts of the team. We try and be as flat as possible in the way that we look at each other and what we're doing. And I think that mindset has always led us to find other people who we think can teach us things. And that started early on. I mean, even from our very early projects, we were looking to find other people that we admired in different creative fields that could lend us their expertise and could lend us their talents. And we've had just the crazy opportunity to be able to work with just so many different people. So for example, on Infinity Blade, so we were making this, and it's no big deal, like I totally get, it's no big deal if you have or haven't, but Are you familiar with the games we've made at all? Have any of you heard of Shadow Complex or Infinity Blade or anything like that? Okay. So you guys can just tell me when to stop, or you can tell. You're telling me to stop now? All right. Okay. Okay, gotcha. So we had this crazy idea that we wanted to make a non-linear exploration-based side-scroller, and this was in 2007. Now, in 2007, the only games people were really making were first-person shooters and third-person action games. And we said to ourselves, man, we loved playing games on the Super Nintendo growing up. We loved playing games like Super Metroid. And wouldn't it be so cool if we could start a resurgence of 3D side-scrollers? And to do that, we wanted to create this game that was very similar in structure to some of these great side-scrollers of the past. But we also had this idea that we wanted to do it in our version of like G.I. Joe. Because we grew up in the 80s and we loved G.I. Joe. And we loved the dichotomy between like G.I. Joe and Cobra. And the idea that there was this like high-tech bad guy versus this regular kind of military group. And we thought, man, there's no better way to describe that story than some of the people who wrote that in the 80s, like some of these really awesome comic book writers. And there was this one comic book writer in particular named Peter David, who was one of like the big writers on Hulk and on Spider-Man and a lot of the Star Trek novels and like all these classic like Wolverine comics that I grew up reading and loving. And we're just like, man, we need someone like a Peter David who can write concise dialogue, who understands story structure, who understands flow. And our attitude has always just been, these are all just people like us. And the worst that can ever happen is someone just says no. And so we'd go to people and be like, yeah, we think we want to get someone like Peter David to work on our game. And they'd be like, you can't get Peter David. He's Peter David. We're like, all right, well, maybe we'll think of someone else. And we're like, no, we need to get Peter David. And so we would just stalk people, kind of, and we would track them down on the internet. And the internet can get you lots of information. And we would, like, find out where they lived and find out, like, their phone number. And then we would just, like, call them. And we just called up Peter David, and we're like, what's up, Peter David? And you just never know. Like, there's just weird stuff that happens. Like, Peter David just happened to live, like, a few miles from where my wife grew up. And her dad and him bowled on the same bowling league. And we're like, what? And her dad's like, that guy's a jerk. You know, he stinks at bowling, you know. We should edit that out of the video. But through stuff like that, you get talking. And you are just the same people. And then Peter David's like, of course I'd love to work on your game. And then you're working with Peter David. And it's no different with Peter David. Yeah, not anymore. Luckily, we already have the script for Shadow Complex 2 from him, so we're good. No, it's fine. We don't have to edit that out. But it's the same thing. I mean, even like with J.J. Abrams, right? Like, I'm such a huge fan of J.J. And it's crazy because going back to that same meeting, like J.J. comes and sits down, and I have no idea what I'm going to say to J.J. Abrams. But he just starts talking, and he's like, he's like, so I was at the God King the other day, and I had equipped this certain sword from Infinity Blade, and I was doing this, and I didn't know which gem to equip to give me the right, like, perk when I'm fighting the God King. So what do I do? And I'm like, I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, he plays Infinity Blade, you know? And it just goes easy from there because JJ has teenagers, right? And they're like, Dad, I'm stuck at this part on this dumb game, help me, right? And now he has to play Infinity Blade, right? And so you just start talking. And it's interesting because with these partners, and I think with creative people, that's what I've learned more than anything is that we are all the same. We all have the same loves. We all have the same passion. And so it's easy to collaborate because because we all draw from that same source and that same need to be creative. And so it was literally within minutes of talking with JJ that we both, all of us in that room, started to feel this sense of inevitability. This inevitability that we're not just here saying, hi, I love Lost, and oh, I like Infinity Blade. You know, it was this deeper connection of admiration of talent and admiration of the potential of collaboration. And by the end of that meeting, by the end of that meeting, we were shaking hands saying, we're going to build something together. And we're going to build something original together and something unique. And we've been collaborating ever since. And the cool thing about that is, yeah, it's freaking J.J. Abrams, and it's awesome, and he's brilliant, and his team is brilliant. But it's not that different than all the other brilliant people that I work with also every day on the team at ChAIR. And it's not that different than many of you in this room who have worked with us in the past on things, and who potentially will work on stuff with us in the future on things, because that's what this is about. It's about finding people that can bring their creative visions together. And that's what's different, I think, about games and film than, say, like writing a book or other types of expression, because it requires a team. You can technically make a game on your own. You could technically make a film on your own. But for most of us in this room, I suspect that your desire is to reach beyond a singular vision. And to do that, you need other people. And I'm telling you from all of my experience that the best stuff comes from people that know how to collaborate and know how to work together, how to take feedback, how to not yoko each other. And if you can do that, you can build things that will actually change the world. Like, you can build stuff that we had no idea when we set out to make Shadow Complex what that would do. We had no idea that Infinity Blade would have 60 million people playing it today, right? We thought, the day before Infinity Blade came out, I was doing this interview with, I think, USA Today or something, and they're like, all right, tell us how many people are going to buy Infinity Blade tomorrow? And I'm like, I look around ChAIR and I'm like counting. I'm like, 11 copies, you know? Right? Because we don't know. We just build stuff that we love, right? We build stuff that we think we want to play and that we think is cool. And then if that resonates with other people, then awesome. But when it does, it's so powerful. And that only happens because we work together and we strive hard to truly collaborate. And when you do that, again, it's magic. Okay, I'm done, but ask me whatever questions you want. I'll stay as long as you want. But you guys can leave if you're bored. So the question is, how do you make good decisions? Well, that's a really good question, and it's a very nuanced question because it depends, right? And I think this is true. You guys step in if it's not. But in our experience, every product is actually pretty different, and there will be things. You know, there were things that were the right choice in like Infinity Blade that were totally the wrong choice in Shadow Complex, and on Spy Jinx now what we're working on. Like, there's a whole lot of new things that, you know, cause us to have to look at things differently. That said, there is a lot of stuff that's the same, and I think that one of the things we put in place to help people better make decisions, maybe that's a better way to answer it, is we try really hard, and when we talk about flatness, we try really hard to make sure that everyone on the team has a very broad understanding of the entire product. We see a lot of game companies that don't do that, where they're very siloed, where it's like, I make the texture map for characters, and that's your job, and that's what you do, and the next character comes through the pipeline, you make the texture, next one comes through, and you're just cranking out character textures all day. Or you're the sound designer, and you're just making sound all day long for footsteps, or whatever it is. And we think that that's the complete wrong approach to product design at ChAIR. We think it has to be the absolute opposite, where early, in those early phases of development where it's like, hey, like again, going back to JJ, coming from that meeting, all of us sat down in a room. And when I mean all of us, I mean everybody. Like our conference room at ChAIR, we purposely built to be able to fit the entire company in one room so that we can have the whole company in one room and we can say, what are we making next? And it starts there. And it starts with everybody talking through it. And some of those meetings could be considered inefficient, right? Because you're taking literally all these people that are specialists in doing other things and saying no for maybe even weeks at a time. You're going to be spending all day long talking through what this new thing could be and how it could function and what the shape of it is in our minds. And then even after that, once the team all has it, and we're like, yes, that's the thing in our head. That's the thing we're going to build. And then we start building it, and still, like every week, so what we do now that we're a little bigger, we're like 25 people, every Thursday, we have this thing called show and tell, where the whole company stops, and the entire company goes from computer to computer, looking at what people are working on that week, and why they're working on it, and how it fits into the larger whole. And that's the key. We think that's what makes people make better decisions, because if your primary job is, let's say, making texture maps for a character, if you can see the whole vision, and not just the vision of the game, but the vision of how will this texture map that I'm making impact marketing 2 years from now, or impact the way that the player sees this thing 3 years from now, you're probably going to make better choices because you have a much larger scope of vision. And that's, again, I think one of our key secrets is every single person at ChAIR knows the whole thing. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. Okay, yep, go ahead.
I'm just curious, looking around the room, I'm seeing almost all men, and I don't mean to ask specifically about ChAIR, but I wondered your thoughts in general about women in the gaming industry. That's certainly something that's been controversial here in Utah.
No, that's a great question. So the question was, why, well, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but basically, why don't we see more women in gaming? I think that wonderfully, that's changing, and it's changing really rapidly. I think it's just, I think a big part of it is because how young the game industry is. I mean, and that's a crazy thing to think about, right? Like, gaming has only even existed in our, well, I guess basically just showing my age, my lifetime, right? Like, it's only been around since the late 70s. And I think that's what actually attracted me and hopefully a lot of us to why are we making games? Because there's still so much room for innovation and so much room for pioneering. Like the way that we make games today is actually totally different than the way we made games 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And in 10 years, it's going to be totally different again because it's such an early thing. And I think for whatever reason, when games started gaining popularity in the 80s and then the 90s, it just attracted more boys to it. But that's not the case anymore, right? I think with the proliferation of these magnificent things that have changed everything, it's also changed the way that we view interactive entertainment. And there are now just as many women, if not more, playing and enjoying meaningful interactive entertainment every single day. And because of that, it's inspiring women and men everywhere to want to create that interactive entertainment, and that's it, right? Like, it'll fix itself, right? It's coming. And we're starting to see a lot more of it, and I really believe this issue is a non-issue. It's just the natural beginnings of an early industry, and 10 years from now, we won't even be talking about this.
Yeah, so it seems like ChAIR, you guys are very good at taking stuff you were inspired from the 80s, like Shadow Complexes, like the Metroid and Infinity Blades, like your Mike Tyson Punch-Out, and taking that and just making it like awesome and just like revolutionizing it. And so I guess I'm kind of curious if you're still going to
Yeah, you know what? I mean, yes. Yeah, no, we're probably too much in love with the 80s. This one, which actually is perfect because we're old enough now, the 80s are coming back. Like, I really do. I think the next, 2 to 5 years, like, you start to even listen to, pop stations right now. Like, there's a lot of 80s influence creeping in there, right? And I'm starting to see pegged pants. Like, how many of you even already have them? Like, I'm starting to see it. They're coming back, so ChAIR's just ahead of the curve. We're just really ahead of the curve. Spyjink's core gameplay, there aren't a lot of examples from the 80s. Spyjinks is, unless you go back to crazy early text-based stuff, but that doesn't really count. Spyjinks is fundamentally a very emergent game. We're trying very much to, and actually I think this is one of the things that, it was interesting, sitting down with ChAIR and with Bad Robot, you'd kind of think, oh, they're gonna make this crazy story-based game that's got tons of cutscenes. And for us, we sat down and we're like, okay, rule number one for both of us, we're like, let's make a game with 0 cutscenes. Right? Let's make a game that never takes control away from the player, not for 1 second. That has to be our cardinal rule. And how do we make a game that is all about taking systemic design and then giving control to the player in the ways that they could just kind of build their own world? And so for us with Spyjinks, our goal is to say we're very much inspired by 70s and 80s espionage, where it's we just love early Bond movies and stuff, where we're like, what if there was a game where you could kind of become the ultimate mastermind? You could become the ultimate Bond villain. If you wanted to form the Illuminati, you could. If you wanted to be Danny Ocean, this super slick mastermind guy that can set up the ultimate heist, that's kind of the fiction of the world, and it's very inspired from the 80s, but the gameplay is very kind of open world and systemic and not a lot of what we've seen before, so it's kind of unique and different. But we'll see. It's pretty scary for us. It's probably the most the game that we've made so far that's the most just kind of out there and new kind of crazy stuff. So hopefully people like it. We think it's pretty cool. There's some cool stuff. Okay, last question.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, because I understand that ChAIR does kind of a large amount of outsourcing, like a lot of the graphic assets, is that right?
No, that's not right.
You do graphics in-house. I was going to ask how you evaluate.
Well, okay, so I guess let me elaborate. So the question was, does ChAIR do a lot of outsourcing? And I guess what I should have said is kind of. So one of the awesome advantages of being part of Epic is that we get to be this really small, scrappy, independent studio that does whatever they want, but within this larger framework of assets and money and support and engine and stuff like that. And so up until very recently, so we do a lot of insourcing, where it'll be more so Epic worldwide is about 400 people, 500 people, whatever, hundreds of people. And we've got studios worldwide. So we've got a 50, 60 person team in Poland. We've got 50 people in London. We've got 30 people in Seattle. We've got people here at ChAIR. We've got 100 people in North Carolina. We've got a bunch of people in China and in Japan and in South Korea. And so we kind of have this worldwide network. And so at ChAIR, we do all the primary stuff. So Bert right here is our lead character designer and implementer. So for any Infinity Blade character, for example, it originates with Bert. He's doing all the core designs. He's getting it all ready. He's building all the hero models. And then once we have that process in place, we would tend to then start to outsource that to our Poland team or our China team or stuff like that. And so that makes evaluation a little easier, just because already to get into the Epic framework. We've evaluated you pretty heavily. But I mean, we're starting to loosen up some of that. That's where we do more collaboration, right? There's a lot. It's working with awesome musicians who aren't part of ChAIR, or working with, we have different concept artists we'll work with, or, and people, it goes from JJ to not that there's any difference, because that's the difference. We see them all as collaborators, but that's how we evaluate. So we've kind of had it, well, not easier. It's just we're really careful who we hire, and maybe that's the good final point is ChAIR has stayed really small. So Shadow Complex was made by 9 people. Infinity Blade was made by 11 people. We're now as big as we've ever, and probably will ever get. We're kind of at the point where like, okay, this is 25 people, it's so much. And yet everyone else, like in Epic and in the industry, is like, how are you guys so crazy? Like only 25 people. And that's on purpose. Like we could easily be hundreds of people at ChAIR. We have the opportunity, we have the means, we could do that. It's just that we learned early on that it's better to hire no one than to hire the wrong person. Period. Like, it's so important who you hire. And maybe this is just our core philosophy of collaboration. Because you have to collaborate so tightly to make something great, even one person who isn't that collaborator can wreck it, can just destroy it. And, we've been really lucky at ChAIR. We've had only 1 or 2 instances where we let the wrong one in, right? And we try to just be super careful, and it sometimes means that our team is much more overloaded because everyone at ChAIR has to wear multiple hats. Like there's no room at ChAIR to be like, I just do this one thing. Like you have to pretty much do lots of stuff, but it's helped us keep our quality high. Anyway, I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but that's what we do. Okay, thanks everyone.